Alright, let's talk about Star Wars Outlaws. I finished it in about 20 to 23 hours and I'm pretty happy with that because I only paid like 20 bucks for this game because I got it through the Ubisoft Plus subscription thing that I got for a month, so that's pretty good. And I would recommend it to just about anyone, but if there's one thing I can say up front is this, that this game is definitely worth your time even if you're remotely interested in the Star Wars universe.
Good work, buddy.
So let's kick things off with the story. Right off the bat, I found the story to be a little bit underwhelming at the start. Look, it gives you enough backstory to get you going, but there's this assumption that you're already familiar with the Star Wars universe. So if you've seen the movies and you're able to follow the plot to other related media like the Mandalorian TV show for example, you're gonna be fine. But for the remaining 12 people who know nothing about Star Wars, you might find yourself a little bit lost when it comes to understanding different syndicates and some of the more subtle politics in the universe. So you play as Kay Vess, who's a thief. She ends up getting into trouble with some shady characters. Kay is good with hacking, sneaking around, and getting herself out of tight spots, which is something she learned from her mom when she was younger, but the basic plot boils down to this. You're out to pull off a massive heist to set yourself up for life. Along the way, you're going to be assembling a crew, dodging the authorities, and dealing with some familiar faces. And speaking of familiar faces, the game does a nice job of mixing new characters with some iconic ones. For example, Jabba the Hutt makes an appearance, and there are a couple of other ones that I'm not going to spoil here, but it's not just fan service. It fits within the larger story in a way that feels natural. Now, let's talk about Kay a bit more. She's someone who claims not to trust anyone, and Kay makes it a point to repeat this a lot throughout the story. And we do learn where this mindset comes from eventually.
What was your lesson?
Can't trust someone's always gonna be there.
But, and this is something that kind of bugged me, she immediately starts trusting people anyway. Like, it doesn't matter what she says, she just meets people and starts following their orders immediately without really thinking whether she should trust them or not. And I get that sometimes she has to do it out of desperation, like she doesn't really have a choice, but that only happens a few times in the game. She claims to be this independent thief who only needs Nix to help her with things. I would expect her to be able to manage her problems by herself for the most part, but what I found was her character constantly needed other people to help her with different things. Look, this is a problem with cheap writing in my opinion, and I found myself to get over it fairly quickly because the story does move on, and so do you. So as the story progresses, you do get to see her grow closer to her crew, and by the end, you start to understand why she becomes so protective of them. It's just that the pacing could have been a little bit better, I think. If the game had just spent a little bit more time giving us some backstory on each of the crew members, or even getting Kay to go on missions with them a bit more, it would have really elevated the emotional impact. And the other thing that bugged me about Kay is how horrible of a liar she is. She always has this unconvincing way of speaking, even when she is telling the truth. I mean, someone might argue that it's just the way she talks, but I mean, if I was trying to get myself out of a tight situation by lying, I would probably try to sound a little bit more convincing than this.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Brother,
I went into Star Wars Outlaws with no idea what to expect, and I was genuinely surprised at how much stealth plays a role in this game. So this isn't your typical run and gun shooter. You're gonna be sneaking around quite a bit, and for me, that worked really well. You gotta manage your surroundings, track enemy movements, and carefully plan your approach. There is even a lockpicking mechanic, plus hacking into security systems. This all adds a really nice layer of variety to the gameplay.
I'm gonna have to go into hardcore hacking mode.
Now, while the game encourages a more methodical, stealthy approach, it doesn't force you into it. So you can absolutely go in guns blazing if that's your style, as long as you disable alarm systems beforehand to avoid triggering a bunch of reinforcements. But when you do manage to pull off a perfectly executed stealth mission, it's incredibly satisfying.
boy, that'd be satisfying.
A lot of missions revolve around sneaking into areas, disabling or altering alarms, stealing information, and getting out undetected. And if things do go wrong, it's not too punishing, like there's always ways to recover and adapt on the fly. I found myself relying on Nix quite a bit to sabotage alarms and set traps, which gave me an advantage when things started to heat up. And speaking of Nix, your pet, he plays a huge role in combat. Like I said, you can send him to interact with the environment, disable alarms, distract enemies, and this all opens up more strategic options. He can even kind of show you if there are enemies nearby. There are a few moments where you don't have access to him during missions, and that really shows how dependent you become on his abilities throughout the game, especially when it comes to managing your stealth ability. Is that even a word? Look, the game does a great job of intertwining Nix into both the narrative and gameplay without making it feel like a gimmick. The next thing is your blaster. That's your main ranged weapon. It is highly customizable. There are different configurations for it depending on the type of enemies you're facing. So whether it's dealing with shielded enemies, androids, or crowd control, your blaster lets you adapt to different combat scenarios. You can upgrade it, and even your crew contributes to these upgrades by giving you items throughout the game, which really adds to the sense that your crew is actively involved in your journey. So as you go through missions and engage with combat, you also fill up your blaster's energy gauge, which when it's full will allow you to trigger Kay's ultimate, Adrenaline Rush. When you pop this, you get this cool slow motion thing that happens, and you can target I think up to like 3 enemies, and when you pull the trigger, she will kill all 3 in quick successions. You can raise the number of people you can shoot to I think up to like 6. But you need to do the quests for your blaster to get this done. It's also worth mentioning that this is the only way to shoot people when you're on your Stealer bike. You can also switch up your playstyle by wearing specific pieces of armor and using specific trinkets to enhance your abilities. You can mix and match, and there are even like item set bonuses to really encourage you to go and find different gear. Look, I didn't find myself having to go out of my way to get anything specific. Like, I could if I wanted to, but I didn't feel like I was forced to do it. And like by the end of the game, I already had a set bonus on my armor that just happened to fit my playstyle, which was a nice coincidence. Kay can also punch people, and I mean really punch people.
It's raining out, so let's get this over with.
I don't know how strong she is physically, but man, this girl can punch. I mean, she can knock out a stormtrooper in full armor with like 2 punches. So yeah, for some people this might break immersion, but I'm not here for immersion. I'm here for Star Wars, and I thought it was pretty cool that she can do this. There is no traditional leveling system here, so like there is no XP bars or anything like that. You learn new abilities by doing tasks and fulfilling different requirements for different people that you meet as you play the game. And I thought this is an interesting way of implementing different play styles depending on how you want to play the game. The space combat though, okay, look, it's fine, it's serviceable, but it's not amazing. The dogfights dragged on a bit longer than I would have liked, and while the mechanics were solid, they didn't add anything particularly new. Visually, the space stations are stunning, with some jaw-dropping moments when you're flying in orbit or engaging in combat against the backdrop of stars. I know there's a lot of people who've been talking trash about the space combat in this game, and personally, I don't think it's as bad as they're making it out to be. Like, my only issue with it was that it just goes on for too long. I really wish they would have just cut it down a little bit more so that it just ends a bit faster. So next I'm going to talk about the world and environment design in Star Wars Outlaws, and this is where we see quality over quantity. You only have access to 3 planets, and while it's not like a fully open world experience, there is enough freedom to explore and get lost in each location. The towns feel alive, and the environments are packed with detail. Whether it's like a crowded city street or the barren landscapes of a desert planet, you really feel immersed in the Star Wars universe. What I love most is how it captures that darker side of the galaxy. You're constantly reminded that everyone is out for themselves, and the atmosphere reflects that. So from the backstabbing politics to the black market deals, this game nails the tone of Star Wars at its grittiest. Traversal is also fun, so you've got your trusty speeder bike, which you can use to get around, and the game does a great job of making exploration rewarding. There's also fast travel if you unlock the points first. Plus, you can travel between planets using your spaceship. While exploring, you can stumble across side quests, hidden treasures, or just get lost in the world for a bit. So for reference, in my 20 to 23 hours with Star Wars Outlaws, the first 15 hours I managed to complete like the first 60% of the main story, and that's because I kept wanting to explore and do side quests, so I was distracted quite a bit. And then I decided that I just wanted to finish the story to see how things unfold, and so the other 40% of the main story took me about 5 to 8 hours, and again that includes some side quests because I just couldn't help myself. So I would say that there is still about 15 to 20 hours of gameplay left for me to do, and this is obviously at my pace, which might be different to you, but look, I just wanted to paint a picture of how much content you get with this game. So visually, Star Wars Outlaws looks good, though it's not the best I've ever seen, especially after playing the Callisto Protocol. I ran Outlaws at 2K with DLSS upscaling set to balance with most settings set to high, except I immediately turned off film grain and motion blur options because that's just not my jam, and it held steady at around 120 FPS for most of my playthrough. I do use a 4070 Super graphics card, so my gear isn't exactly the highest, but it matched the system requirement that was posted on social media for this game, so no complaints here. The lighting, character models, and the environments are all beautifully done, and the game is generally well optimized for PC. I didn't experience any crashes or major performance issues except for this weird VRAM leak, which has already been addressed, and apparently a patch has been pushed out, but for some reason my Ubisoft client just hasn't updated the game for me yet. I also had a minor graphical glitch at the beginning of the game. It was like a weird lighting bug early on that made me question whether something was on fire or it was just like a weird sunrise or something. Luckily, it was an easy fix by just tweaking some settings. Overall though, I'd say the game looks great, but it's no Callisto Protocol. The only thing that really bothered me in terms of graphics is how facial capture and lip sync is done in this game.
Get me out of here.
I'm sorry, you are?
Something is horribly wrong here, and I really hope they can fix this with a patch or something, because these characters, like, even though the voice acting is actually pretty nice, their faces just don't match what they're saying. It took me a while to get used to it, but it's honestly the first thing that popped out to me, and it really bothered me for a while. I also tried playing Star Wars Outlaws on the Steam Deck. I'm using Windows 11 on my deck these days, so I had no compatibility issues, and at the time of writing the script, I couldn't find anything on ProtonDB regarding SteamOS compatibility, and the game at the moment is not on Steam, which makes things a little bit more complicated when it comes to learning whether the game is compatible with SteamOS or not. But look, if you're on SteamOS and you want to try this game, you can use the Heroic Game Launcher or non-Steam Launcher to see if it works. I've made video guides for both methods before, and I'm going to leave the link in the description under the like and subscribe button. If you do end up trying this out, can you please let me know in the comment section how it runs on SteamOS? I'm sure it's going to help someone out when they go and have a look at the comments. In terms of the performance on Steam Deck, yeah, look, you're not getting the most out of the game. I mean, it runs, and if you tweak things around, you can get like a steady 25 to 30 FPS. I had this weird screen tearing thing that was happening just at the lower third of my screen, but other than that, I had no issues. And I can also see there's a little bit of screen tearing as I'm editing the video, so it might pop up on YouTube as well, but I didn't see it whilst playing on the Steam Deck. Now let's have a look and see how Star Wars Outlaws has been reviewed. On OpenCritic, the game has received a strong rating. It's also got the score of 76 as its top critic average, with 69% of critics recommending the game.
Nice.
On Metacritic, it received a generally favorable score based on 82 critic reviews. User ratings have been a little bit harsher though, given the average of 5.4 based on 1,617 user ratings. Morgan Park from PC Gamer rated the game 73 out of 100 and said, quote, "Star Wars Outlaws is Ubisoft's most ambitious game in years, but it plays the basics way too safe," end quote. Jade King from The Gamer gave the game 3.5 out of 5 and said, quote, "A lackluster story, a bizarre lack of polish for a production of this scale, and a main character that isn't the step forward she should have been all hold the game back from excellence," end quote. And finally, Josh West from Games Radar Plus rated the game 3.5 out of 5 and said, quote, "You really do feel a part of a wider world rather than a function of it," end quote. So to sum things up, Star Wars Outlaws is a game that delivers on many fronts, but also stumbles in a few areas. The story has its highs and lows with some pacing issues, but it's immersive enough to keep you engaged. The combat system, especially the stealth elements, is fun and rewarding, though it's not groundbreaking. And the world design, that's where this game really shines. It feels like a living, breathing part of the Star Wars universe with all the grit and complexity that entails. If you're a Star Wars fan, you're probably gonna love this game, especially for its world building and character cameos. For those less familiar with the franchise, it might be a bit of a steeper climb, but the game is still worth a playthrough, especially if you enjoy stealth-based gameplay with a side of space exploration. At the end of the day though, Star Wars Outlaws isn't trying to reinvent the wheel, but it's a solid experience that I had a lot of fun with. For a more in-depth analysis, feel free to check out my written review on my Patreon, which is and always will be free, no paywall whatsoever. You can find the link pinned at the top of the comment section below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.